In the ruins of Hollow Creek, a record survives not in ledgers, but in memory. The story of the triplets endures through silence, song, and absence. What was never written remains remembered. Tonight, Forgotten Chronicles examines how a single omission became one of the South's most enduring historical anomalies. In the year 1845, records from the Hollow Creek plantation in Mississippi note the delivery of a child in the slave quarters. The entry, kept in the plantation ledger, lists only one infant who did not survive the night. Beyond this, the official documentation contains no further detail. Yet accounts passed down by witnesses and fragments of overseer notes describe something different. Not one child, but 3. The children were female, described as small but healthy, their appearance marked by no visible defect or weakness. They were born to an enslaved woman whose name is preserved in fragments of oral memory, but omitted from the written records of the estate. Contemporary descriptions state that the sisters seemed bound together in their actions. Even in their first days, their breathing fell into rhythm, their movements occurred as if synchronized, and on more than one occasion, the sound of a low humming was heard when they rested side by side. Enslaved attendants whispered of the births, recording the event through memory rather than paper. To them, the survival of all 3 sisters was a sign of endurance. But in the official structures of the plantation, the children's existence was denied. Only the single line, "one stillborn," appeared in the ledgers, ensuring that no written evidence of 3 living children remained within the master's records. The omission created a divide between the documented and the remembered. Overseers dismissed the humming as imagination, while enslaved families preserved the details in whispered accounts. The contrast between silence in the ledger and the persistence of memory marked the beginning of the Hollow Creek anomaly. From the very moment of their birth, the sisters existed both within and outside the historical record, their presence confirmed only by those who lived beside them. This quiet beginning set the stage for what followed. The plantation staff would soon attempt to contain the children, confining them within the stone cellar of the estate. It was there, under observation, that their unusual presence would grow more pronounced, attracting the attention of masters and physicians alike. Following their birth, the Hollow Creek triplets were soon removed from the quarters of the enslaved and placed into the cellar beneath the main house. The cellar was a stone structure, built originally for the storage of tools, barrels, and preserved food. It was cold, poorly lit, and held the smell of damp earth. In plantation records, this cellar was listed only as storage space, but testimony from overseers and a later physician's journal confirms that the 3 children were kept there for observation and control. Reports state that confinement did not alter their unusual unity. Even when the triplets were separated to different corners of the cellar, the humming continued without interruption, as though each child could produce the same sound in rhythm with the others. Witnesses, both enslaved attendants and overseers, remarked on the way the stone itself seemed to carry the vibration, creating a resonance that could be felt through the floor. Attempts to break this pattern were made. Overseers recorded punishment, isolation, and the use of restraints, yet no change was noted in their behavior. Instead, the humming persisted. One physician who visited the plantation wrote in his notes that the subjects maintain a coordination that defies ordinary cause, their pulses and breath bound in one measure. He added that instruments placed near the stone walls seemed to quiver lightly, though no draught of air or external force was present. For the enslaved community, the confinement was observed from a distance. They noted the sounds that carried beyond the cellar and into the night. Some described the humming as unsettling, while others regarded it in silence, never speaking openly for fear of punishment. For the masters and their hired observers, the confinement was seen as an experiment, an effort to impose order where none appeared possible. The cellar, meant to contain and suppress, instead became the space where the triplets' presence grew more pronounced. Punishment brought no submission, and separation brought no change. In this failure of control, tension began to grow within the plantation, setting the stage for the unexplained disappearance that would soon follow. In the late summer of 1845, the Hollow Creek records mark an interruption in the daily order of the plantation. A line in the overseer's notes refers only to unexplained disorder in the cellar. No direct mention of the children appears, but testimonies preserved later from both enslaved attendants and staff confirm that on one night the triplets confined below the main house were gone. The disappearance was immediate and total. At dawn, when attendants came to deliver food, the cellar was empty. The restraints were found unbroken, and the doors remained barred as they had been through the night. Searches were ordered at once. Overseers led dogs through the surrounding grounds, while enslaved men were driven to comb the woods and fields. No tracks were reported. The dogs found no scent. The river showed no disturbance. The absence created a rupture in the order of Hollow Creek. Masters demanded confessions, interrogating the enslaved community under threat and punishment, yet no evidence emerged of aid or concealment. The people in the quarters spoke in low tones, describing the sudden stillness of the night when the humming stopped. For years the sound had carried faintly from beneath the house. Now the cellar was silent, its stone walls holding only quiet. This silence unsettled the plantation. Work continued, but unease grew. The enslaved whispered prayers when passing the main house. Overseers wrote only of disruption and defiance of explanation. With no bodies, no fugitives, and no cause recorded, the disappearance entered the history of Hollow Creek as an omission rather than an event. The ledger marked no burial, no sale, no loss. Only the gap remained, an unspoken acknowledgement of absence within a system built on strict accounting. The children, whose births had been denied on paper, were erased again, this time by their sudden vanishing. It was in the wake of this silence that the next disturbance came. Within days, a fire would rise from the estate itself, its timing bound inseparably to the disappearance of the Hollow Creek triplets. The fire at Hollow Creek was recorded in multiple accounts as beginning in the main house shortly after the disappearance of the triplets. The initial outbreak was reported in the western wing, where timber walls and interior furnishings provided fuel. Within minutes, flames spread to adjoining rooms, consuming staircases and upper galleries. The intensity of the blaze forced withdrawal from attempts at internal containment. Witnesses describe the rapid collapse of the roof in sections, beginning with the western corner and extending inward. Adjacent storage sheds containing grain and tools ignited as embers carried on strong air currents. Records note that enslaved individuals formed bucket lines from a nearby well, while overseers directed efforts to save furniture and account ledgers. Despite this, the scale of destruction exceeded available resources. Smoke rose high above the surrounding fields, visible for several miles. Several testimonies, preserved in plantation journals and later depositions, mention the recurrence of a humming sound audible during the fire. It was described as continuous, resonant, and at times indistinguishable from the crackle of burning beams. Reports came from both enslaved workers positioned along the bucket line and from household staff. The detail appears in at least 3 independent accounts, though no official explanation accompanies it. Interpretations of the event diverged sharply. Masters attributed the fire to accident, suggesting negligence involving open flame or the kitchen hearth. Enslaved witnesses, in contrast, associated the destruction with the absent triplets, regarding it as resistance that no chain could contain. These interpretations, however, were preserved only through testimony and oral transmission, rather than official entries. No bodies were recovered from the ruins. The final plantation inventory lists only loss of property, including structural damage to the main house, destroyed furnishings, and lost grain stores. The report does not mention the triplets, either in connection to the fire or to their disappearance. Their absence from the written record marked a shift in how their story survived. From this point forward, recollection of the triplets endured not through ledgers or inventories, but through oral memory and whispered accounts. After the fire at Hollow Creek, the official ledgers made no mention of the triplets. In the plantation records, their existence ended with silence. Yet among the enslaved, memory persisted. The sound that had once filled the cellar and unsettled the house did not vanish with the flames. Instead, it passed into songs, whispers, and fragments of humming that carried through the years. Mothers are recalled as humming to infants with a tone said to echo the sisters. Children repeated the same notes in play, though they did not know the origin. In the evenings, work songs contained long, droning phrases that differed from ordinary melodies. Those who remembered linked the additions to the voices once heard beneath the house. The memory spread quietly. Overseers and masters paid no attention to the low hum of lullabies or the hidden tones woven into songs of labor. The enslaved took care to preserve these fragments in ways that avoided punishment. The sound became less a story than a practice, a part of daily rhythm, hidden in plain hearing. No entry in the ledgers described this persistence, but oral testimony confirmed it. The people spoke of 3 sisters whose unity continued through tone. Their presence lived in sound, not in writing. The record kept by paper erased them, but the memory kept by voice remained. Thus, the triplets passed from event into legend. The humming became a sign of endurance, traveling through whispers, games, and the work of generations. What had been silenced officially endured in secret, ensuring the Hollow Creek sisters were not lost to time. Decades after the fire at Hollow Creek, a damaged letter surfaced in Charleston. It was attributed to one of the physicians who had been called to examine the triplets during their confinement. The paper bore marks of water and fire damage, leaving much of the text lost, but portions remained legible. The letter referred to the children directly, describing them as subjects. One surviving line read, "The subjects persist beyond all expectation. They do not die." Though incomplete, the statement aligned with earlier reports of the sisters' unusual endurance. Other fragments mentioned resonance in stone and auditory continuance, terms suggesting the same vibrations and humming noted in journals at Hollow Creek. The location of its discovery was recorded in an estate inventory in Charleston, where it had been stored among medical papers. Its presence there suggested that at least one physician carried his notes away from Mississippi, preserving fragments outside the plantation record. The letter's damaged state prevented full analysis, but even in partial form, it held significance. For the enslaved communities who had passed on memories of the triplets through song and whisper, the letter provided confirmation. Where the ledgers of Hollow Creek had erased their names, this single document acknowledged their persistence. It did not interpret or explain, but it recognized what official records had denied, that the triplets existed and that they endured beyond expectation. In archival collections, the letter has been preserved not for its clarity but for its rarity. It stands as the only surviving written testimony beyond the plantation accounts, linking oral memory with documentary trace. The damaged paper bridged 2 forms of record, one maintained in silence and song, the other in fragile ink. Following the fire and the disappearance of the Hollow Creek triplets, their memory moved beyond description of events into meaning. Within the enslaved community, the story was interpreted as evidence of endurance. The sisters, though absent from the plantation ledgers, remained present in accounts that gave them symbolic weight. Some testimonies recorded in later years note that the triplets were believed to have reached freedom in the north, carried away without trace. Others describe them as absorbed into the natural environment, tied to the forests and waterways that surrounded Hollow Creek. These variations differed in form, yet they all presented the same conclusion. The children had not been defeated. Their story became less a record of disappearance than an emblem of survival. Transmission of these interpretations required caution. Storytelling took place in private gatherings, at times when surveillance was less strict. The language used was often indirect, shaping the triplets into examples rather than recounting them as individuals. In this way, their memory became adaptable, able to circulate without drawing unwanted attention. Over time, their story spread beyond the boundaries of Hollow Creek. As enslaved individuals were moved, sold, or displaced, they carried fragments of the account with them. By this process, the legend of the triplets reached other plantations, ensuring that their memory was not limited to the site of their birth. What had begun as a local occurrence developed into a shared cultural reference, a point of recognition across communities. This phase of interpretation marked a shift in the triplets' place within memory. They were no longer only a record of unexplained phenomena, but also a symbol of resistance carried through oral tradition. Their absence from official archives contrasted with their prominence in spoken accounts. The mystery of their ultimate fate remained unresolved, and it was this absence of conclusion that allowed the story to continue, renewed with each generation that preserved it. The disappearance of the Hollow Creek triplets left no definitive record. Plantation ledgers did not list their deaths, nor were there burial markers to indicate their resting place. Inventories taken after the fire noted property losses but did not acknowledge the children. This absence has produced a wide range of interpretations, none of which have been confirmed. Among oral accounts preserved within the enslaved community, some maintained that the sisters had escaped, carried northward by means unknown. Others insisted that they had perished in the fire, their presence marked only by the unusual sounds reported during the blaze. Still others described them as having entered a state beyond ordinary explanation, joined inseparably to the environment of Hollow Creek. In each account, the detail of their humming remained constant, used as evidence of their continued existence in some form. Written sources outside the plantation add little certainty. The damaged physician's letter, recovered decades later, recorded persistence beyond expectation, but did not clarify survival or death. No subsequent correspondence has been located to expand upon that statement. Estate records from neighboring properties make passing reference to the Hollow Creek children, though without detail, suggesting that the story had traveled beyond its original site. The inability to classify the sisters within traditional categories, birth, life, and death, gave their story a unique status. They became part of memory, but not of record, present in speech, yet absent in writing. For this reason, their fate has remained unsettled, existing in the space between verifiable fact and inherited narrative. This ambiguity ensured the endurance of their story. Without documentation to close the account, each generation preserved the uncertainty as part of its meaning. The missing entries in ledgers and Tao. The silence of gravestones became as significant as any surviving testimony, leaving the Hollow Creek triplets fixed in history as unresolved figures whose absence continues to be noted. Following the events at Hollow Creek, the account of the triplets did not remain confined to the plantation. Enslaved families carried fragments of the story as they were relocated through sale, transfer, or migration. In this way, the memory of the sisters became mobile, moving across state lines and entering communities with no direct connection to Mississippi. Documentation from the late 19th century records that certain work songs and spirituals contained melodic fragments described as unusual or distinct. Observers noted refrains that repeated in patterns resembling low humming, often without clear lyrical content. These tonal sequences appeared in different regions, yet were linked by oral testimony to the Hollow Creek triplets. Such elements persisted into the 20th century, preserved in field recordings of spirituals collected by folklorists, who remarked upon their repetition and indistinct origins. In family narratives, the triplets' story was recounted alongside accounts of hardship and survival. Children learned fragments of the events through lullabies and lessons transmitted within households. The details were often incomplete, but the core remained. 3 sisters who resisted confinement and whose presence continued beyond official acknowledgement. This preservation within family memory ensured the story survived, even as written records excluded it. Reports also suggest physical associations tied to Hollow Creek itself. Visitors to the former site of the plantation in the decades following emancipation described faint vibrations within the ground and tonal sounds resembling distant humming. While such accounts remain anecdotal, their consistency across testimonies has been noted in local historical surveys. These reports contributed to the perception that the triplets' presence remained attached not only to memory, but also to the landscape. The circulation of their story across plantations, spiritual traditions, and regional histories demonstrates how memory endured in both cultural practice and place. In this process, the Hollow Creek triplets became more than a local occurrence, forming part of a broader legacy that outlasted the physical boundaries of the plantation itself. In the present day, little remains of Hollow Creek beyond scattered foundations, collapsed beams, and fields reclaimed by vegetation. Yet the memory of the triplets persists, preserved not by ledgers or formal documents, but by the accounts of those who lived and transmitted their experiences through speech, song, and recollection. The physical site offers no definitive trace, but correspondence between plantation owners, scattered references in local church records, and oral histories compiled in the late 19th and early 20th centuries confirm the endurance of the story. Letters held in regional archives describe Hollow Creek as a place marked by strange disturbances and unsettled matters, with particular mention of children whose presence could not be accounted for following their disappearance. Family oral histories collected during the Works Progress Administration interviews further record mention of the humming, consistently described as low, continuous and resonant, even when no visible source was observed. Ledger omissions, most notably the absence of burial notations for the triplets, continue to stand in contrast with the otherwise meticulous documentation of enslaved populations on the estate. Reports of humming did not end with the plantation's collapse. Visitors, both local and distant, noted faint vibrations near the ruins during the late 19th century, with a small number of 20th century surveyors and researchers recording similar phenomena. Although no empirical verification exists, the recurrence of testimony suggests a persistent cultural memory anchored to the site. The significance of the Hollow Creek triplets lies not only in their unresolved fate, but also in the broader lesson their story imparts, that memory can endure beyond physical evidence, and that omission from records does not erase lived experience. Their absence by burial ledgers, coupled with the persistence of their story across generations, illustrates the limitations of official documentation in capturing the complexity of human existence under enslavement. In this way, the Hollow Creek case represents more than an isolated narrative. It exemplifies how oral transmission, cultural continuity, and environmental testimony resist erasure, ensuring that even in the absence of definitive proof, remembrance survives. The unresolved questions, sustained humming, and silence of the ledgers leave an enduring record of presence beyond documentation, an unfinished history that continues to resist closure. The Hollow Creek triplets remain absent from records, yet their presence persists in memory and testimony. History leaves no closure, only fragments. If stories like these resonate with you, subscribe to Forgotten Chronicles and join us as we uncover more erased voices, hidden ledgers, and forgotten events. Memory resists erasure. The next record awaits.